It's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Oh, having a meal this late, huh? Emil, Amok to you. Welcome to this program. It's now we've done about 287 of these. It's not ad hoc. It's just a program we do. Because what does a talk show host do when there's the internet and there's a microphone and he's got some talk show implements? That's not flatulence from a talk show host. Although, all the talk shows have this. It does sound a little bit like talk show backfire or something. But, what does a talk show host do when you're not conservative enough for the conservatives? You're not radical. Well, no one's looking for a radical. You're not really all that, well, you're progressive enough for most things. But for the most part, talk shows on radio are so right-wing, they're disgusting. And if you want to say something, comment on the news and do traditional news talk. You just have to crack open a microphone and say, I read the news today. Oh boy. I think John Lennon, Paul McCartney's had something to do with that lyric. And so here we are, show 287, episode 287 of our Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. I talk about life, news from an Asian American perspective from my gong closet here in Asian America. I mean, that's what I call it. I mean, you might know it as the United States, but here we are. And we come on at 2 p.m. Pacific live every Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific live. You can catch us on Twitter at Emil Amok, EMIL-AMOK. You can catch us on YouTube, my pathetic YouTube channel. Only pathetic because you haven't friended it and done all the things that YouTube asks you to do. That algorithm, it's so demanding. But no, you can check out this show live on YouTube and then catch the recordings there. You can catch this on amok.com, the recordings afterwards. Also on Facebook at Facebook Watch, Facebook Live, something. Or on emilguillermo.media on Facebook. Welcome. This is Holy Thursday for all those of you who are holy. For the unholy, it's just Thursday. But tomorrow's Good Friday. And I'm contemplating maybe we just do a repeat tomorrow because those are reverent hours. We might come on at 3 o'clock. We might. Haven't figured that one out yet. But there's so much to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about Lowell High School. If you've been following the Lowell High School saga, the principal has announced his resignation yesterday. It's hit the news later yesterday. And as an alum, I'm concerned, as a school that has more Asian Americans than, it's like 40% Asian American, if I'm not mistaken. It's a great high school. It was great when I was there. It was good for a long, long time. And now San Francisco is trying to wreck it. And it's a joint effort between the school district and the Board of Education and the teachers union, and the students and the teachers are seen as just they're bit players, which is not fair, which is not right. But it does seem like they're just bit players. So we're going to talk about Lowell High School. We're also going to talk about the Phil.elections. They're going to have them. I mean, I know for the longest time we might have thought, oh, maybe they're going to cancel these things because we know what an affront to democracy it will be if Bong Bong Marcos wins. But they're going to have them, and people have already started voting overseas, which means they're voting here in America, dual citizens. I'm not a dual citizen. I'm just both my I guess I might have qualified when my parents were still alive, because both of my parents they were Filipino, born and raised, and my mother was a Philippine citizen. She was a resident alien here, so she maintained her Philippine passport. But anyway, they're all long gone. So I have no claim, I don't think, to be a dual citizen. And I don't know if that's really where I want to put my efforts in terms of my sense of where democracy should be. I'm here in America. But there are dual citizens, and there are people who have, they straddle the Philippines and the United States, and they have some complaints about how the elections run. So we'll get into that. We'll get into Bong Bong Marcos and how this whole thing came to be. Also, 415 tomorrow, Friday, is Jackie Robinson Day. And when I had Giants season tickets, I would love 415, April 15th, because everyone wore number 42. It was a big deal because there was that sense of unity, that sense of racial unity. And I just want to talk about the significance of Jackie Robinson Day and how it goes beyond baseball, how it's more than just baseball, that someone can break a color barrier and it has an impact on society. I mean, it's true every place where it's been pretty much all white for all its history. And that means everything in American society, like the media. And so when you talk about Jackie Robinson Day and breaking the color barrier, it really honors every person of color who has come face to face with an institution and knocked down a wall. So we'll talk about that today too. So lots to talk about here on the Takeout. As you know, I've been talking a lot about this show that I'm not this show. This is a talk show. I mean, with no real discernible punchlines, just discernible observations. Just I talk about things and I tell some stories and hopefully I make some sense. But this is not necessarily a comedy show. This is news talk. Like, you haven't seen, because how many news talk shows have a Filipino American, Asian American talk host? Not many. But this one does, because it didn't cost anything. So what do you got to lose, right? But I do this other show called Amok, A-M-O-K. Amok. It's a Filipino word. And I'm doing it on, as the shared sign says, April 16th. That's Saturday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 Eastern. Oh, that means 3 Pacific. Yes. Saturday, April 16th. It's a fringe performance presented by the National Storytelling Network. God, that sounds big. The National. Yes, there are a bunch of people and they're telling stories. And they have a network. They lock arms and they tell stories to one another. And they get up on the rooftops and they start, like playing a game of telephone. It's kind of interesting. The National Storytelling Network, the reason why they put the time as Central Time is because they're out of the Midwest. And they are presenting me. Imagine that. I get out the plaid shirt in honor of Spalding Gray. I wore plaid shirts. I wear plaid so that I show up, so you see me. But Amok, I'll explain Amok. I'll explain why I'm Emil Amok and why I go Amok. The story is how a poor Filipino kid from California finds his way home from NPR and Harvard. Now, imagine that. And it's kind of some seminal stories I have that have been part of my Amok monologues for a couple years. I've told them at fringe festivals around the country. This is going to be a little different. If you think you've seen the story or heard the story, it's going to be a little different, of course, because it's a COVID. It's a COVID era version. And in fact, I will sing. I did a COVID version where I do sing. Now, you're going to have to see it now. All you have to do is go to storynet.org. There it is. Up there, big. Storynet.org. Imagine that. Go to storynet.org and /events. And what happens is they will ask you to register. Yeah, sort of like being a nurse. You could register as a nurse if you want. No, you register as an attendee. And then you come and, there's a slight fee. I think it's $10. If you join the organization, if you're a storyteller yourself, it's only like $5. But if you can't make it at 5 p.m. Central, 3 Pacific, 6 Eastern Time, they'll send you a link to the show so you can catch it. So you can't lose. You can't lose. And if you hate the show, you can come on my show and you can say, hey, Emil, I hate the show. Now, here's Juanita Salai Wilson, a regular listener, says, good afternoon. Now, she'd never hate the show. She'd never hate the show. And I don't think you're going to hate the show either. You'll probably, if I'm not mistaken, I think you'll like the show. It's about how me, Emil, became Amok, went from San Francisco to NPR and Harvard. And a lot has to do with my father. A lot has to do with my father. I may even have a vision of my dad. It's Amok, A-M-O-K. Saturday, 5 p.m. Central, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific. It won't wreck your weekend. It won't. You know why? It won't wreck your weekend because if you can't make it, just go to storynet.org/events, buy a ticket, and they will send you a link. And that way, you'll know maybe already that it was a train wreck, which is a good reason to see. I'm curious about this because I think Emil, maybe this is going to be something I'm going to want to see if he pulls this off. It's a Zoom show. It's a Zoom show. It's not like this show, Emil Amok's Takeout, which is a radio talk show. This, Amok, is, dare I say, theater. Theater. That's what it is. It's theater. As I say, April 16th, Saturday, Good Saturday. It's Good Saturday because we're waiting for the good one to rise on Sunday. We roll away the rock. And so what are you doing on Good Saturday? You're not probably doing anything. You're probably saying, I don't know what I'm doing Good Saturday, Emil. 3 p.m. Pacific, 5 Central, 6 Eastern. But I guess I'm going to storynet.org, storynet.org/events, and I'm going to register to see this show. I'm going to pay my money. I think they take Bitcoin, but you may not want to. Dollars will do. It's just like $10 if you don't join. But if you join the National Storytelling Network, NSN, like I said, they'll give you half price. The National Storytelling Network. I know it's big. Storytellers. That's what we are. We're just we're just telling stories. Telling stories about, oh, Emil, what about that plaid? That green plaid? That's like, Amok. See, NSN presents Emil Guillermo in a fringe performance. Amok, AMOK, April 16th, Saturday. Storynet.org. Catch it. Catch it. Don't miss it. I think it'll be kind of interesting. You'll say, oh, I see why he's amok now. I get it. I get it now. And I don't regret it. I get it and I don't regret it. There it is. So catch it. Storynet.org, National Storytelling Network. Amok, AMOK. This is Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. Welcome to the program. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, live. We're live. I do it live because that way it's dangerous and there's no excuses. We're doing it. And we cover the news. Hey, this breaking news, they've been talking about that ship that Ukraine sank. Well, now Russia said its seriously damaged flagship in the Black Sea sank. This is from the New York Times. Ukraine had claimed a missile strike on the ship, which Moscow had denied. They can't deny that thing. If we sunk your battleship, if they sunk your battleship, the Ukrainians, if they sunk it, you can't say, oh no, I'm going to gaslight my sunken battleship. You can't do that. So I think the free world is rooting for Ukraine because Russia has gone in on false pretenses saying that the Ukrainians are neo-Nazis trying to eliminate the Russians. That is not credible. So we have this invasion, which Joe Biden has called genocide. The war crimes are mounting up. And you got to ask, is this any way to fight a war? But it is when you're fighting a war that no one wants. If you're fighting a war that is a non-war war, right? And we are asking for peace that is a non-peace peace, right? Because while we're asking for peace in a non-peace peace, we are supplying $800 million to the Ukrainians on top of the $1.6 billion. This is a crazy Orwellian type of situation we're in. But at least today we've got something. When the Russians admit, okay, you sunk our battleship, major lie has been exposed because they said, oh, no, our ship is fine. No, the Russian ship is not fine. You can chalk one up for the Ukrainians. And, once again, I think at some point you're going to have to say, if we get enough sanctions out there, maybe we can win this non-war war with more non-peace weapons, like more sanctions, which is kind of like a passive-aggressive way to fight a war. But like I said, no one wants a war. We're in an era where no one wants a war. We want push-button wars. We want quick wars. We want wars with drones. We want wars where there's no people involved, no boots on the ground. We want that kind of war. But this is a war that ends up, because it's moving to the Donbass region, ends up being more conventional than not. But it is kind of a big deal that Russia is now copping to the truth. Ukraine sunk the Russian battleship. That just reported on the New York Times. So, I'm keeping up with the war because we have to be top of mind with the war. We can talk about all these other things. We can talk about subway shooters. We could talk about, all the things we're going to talk about today. But the war is, and the eventual World War III, or staving that off, that's got to be top of mind. That's got to be important. More important than almost anything else. And so let's hope. Let's hope that it's over sooner than later. That's Tucker Carlson's flatulence. I want to talk about Marcos and the election because already, you may not be aware of this, but Filipino Americans who are dual citizens have started voting on Sunday, and it's not good. I mean, really, it is not good. There are reports that some irregularities in terms of getting ballots to people on the Eastern Seaboard. There's something like in terms of overseas voters from the Philippines or Filipinos overseas who are eligible to vote, 1.7 million. And between Canada and the United States, the bulk of them are here between Canada and the United States. And when you have ballots being distributed to consulates and to voters, and they've got wrong addresses, they're being returned. They've got a group called the U.S. Committee for Good Governance. Yeah, the U.S. Committee for Good Governance. They're out there. U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance. They're reporting that, first of all, they're concerned that we're the watchers, the poll watchers, and the media. Just as a pair of eyes looking at absentee voting. They also are talking about this committee, which is based in Virginia here in the United States, a 1 week delay of mailing about 35,511 absentee ballots by the embassy to Filipino voters in, believe it or not, there are Filipino voters, Alabama, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, almost 36,000 absentee ballots. And then, of course, there are still unresolved questions about how in previous elections, some of these ballots have just been lost in the mail. And people have to fill them out and return them before May 9th. That's why the voting started on April 10th. They've got to fill them out, return them before that deadline of May 9th. And you might say, okay, look, Emil, 65.7 million are eligible in the Philippines and only 1.7 are eligible here. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. You know why? Because that 1.7 million overseas, they send a lot of remittances back to the Philippines, an ungodly amount, because there's no real economy in the Philippines. There's no real work in the Philippines that people can rely on. I mean, there is. Look, I exaggerate somewhat, but for generations, Filipinos have been in this economic diaspora all throughout the world because that's what they do. They work overseas in Saudi, in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, and then they send back remittances to the Philippines. So, you think it's important for people overseas to vote? People who are not just dual citizens, but also are just happen to be part of this economic diaspora? Yes, it's important to vote. Because 1.7 overseas, but they give more than $1.7 million back to the Philippines. It's a democracy, right? That's the issue. So the U.S. Filipinos for Good Governance making this pitch, talking to the consulates, talking to the embassies here, saying, got to do something about making sure people get their ballots, because this is an important election. I say this, it's important for the Filipinos, but it's also important to Americans. This could be your democracy, because it's been a slow burn to get to this point where Bongbong Marcos, the son of the dictator, could be the next president of the Philippines. And it starts back in 1989, when after the family gets kicked out, in 86, they leave in exile to Hawaii. They come back in 89. They start rebuilding. Bong Bong becomes governor of Ilocos Norte. You got Imelda running a couple times for president and losing, but she's still in the Congress, or was. She's 92 now. The family still hasn't given back all of the money it looted, an estimated $10 billion. About, I believe, a third has been recovered. That's some, but another $2 billion is in litigation, and that could be, if Bong Bong gets elected president, they're not going to go after that money. The real serious thing that's going on in the Philippines now is that 56% of voters in that 18 to 40 category, they have no idea of the atrocities committed by Ferdinand Marcos. And the atrocities by Ferdinand Marcos are not inconsiderate. I mean, they're considerable, not inconsiderable. Amnesty International, in 2016, they said that Marcos imprisoned 70,000 people during martial law, tortured 34,000 people, killed 3,200 Filipinos. This is Amnesty International. And this was done from my reporting back in 2016, when the current outgoing president, Duterte, did the first step in rehab. Well, if the first step was the Marcos' returning in 89, the big step was burying Marcos' body in 2016. Imagine this. Marcos was, like in a refrigerated mausoleum type place where people can look at the body from 1989 to 2016. And finally, when Duterte, the guy who is known for his extrajudicial killings, Duterte allowed for Marcos to be buried in the Cemetery of Heroes, which was the beginning of the rehabilitation, the real rehabilitation of the Marcos name. When Big Daddy, late dictator Marcos, was essentially buried with the heroes of the Philippines, despite the 10 billion looted, despite the 70,000 people imprisoned during martial law, despite the 34,000 tortured, despite the 3,200 Filipinos killed during martial law. I mean, this all happened, and it was seen as politically inconceivable, and yet it happened. And almost like as if it were like an undercover thing. They prohibited the press for the most part. They had just, the official cameras. Some people called it sneaky. Some people called it a hidden burial. And then you saw pictures in social media. And really, it was an insult to people who were protesting worldwide, including 4 million Filipinos in America. But this is how Marcos, the name, was rehabilitated. And now you have Bong Bong Marcos, the son, poised to win the presidency. He attends no debates. He just does some things on social media. He's just running on the name that's being rehabilitated in social media, wiping out the history of the past, which is a rich history. If you go back to the U.S.-Philippine War and go back to when America colonized the Philippines and made the Philippine democracy in America's image. I mean, that is really that is really the hard thing to take, that we are watching in slow motion the democracy built in our image, built in the U.S. image. We're seeing it destroyed in real time. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, because this is kind of the global situation for democracies all over the world. We see it with Putin. We see it with Trump and the Republicans and those who hold on to what happened in the era of President 45. It is really the trend. I don't know how we stop it, except we see the model in the Philippines. They go after the facts. They destroy it in social media with propaganda and with misinformation. And there's a whole generation of voters who have no idea about how bad the Philippines was under Marcos. I think with the Philippines, we are seeing the rehearsal for the end of democracy. Oh, it looks like democracy, just like it looked like America from the time of imperialism to now. It looked like real democracy, but we are seeing the dress rehearsal for the demise of democracy essentially everywhere. And this one hurts because it is so close to American democracy. The Philippines was our colony. And they may be leading the way in terms of how democracy goes, where misinformation, facts, or misinformation outstrip the facts, outstrip history, and we end up with really a democracy that is unrecognizable. That is sad. May 9th is when the actual vote in the Philippines takes place. But as I said, they're voting now in America and overseas. And already reports of people saying, hey, something's wrong. Something's not right. Got to fix this. I don't know if there's time. I just think what we have to hope for is that the legit government officials who are, when I say legit, I mean the honest ones, the ones who believe in real democracy, who don't believe in propaganda. Right now, that would be the candidacy of the current Vice President, Leni Robredo. But so far, she's got a month. And if there's more rallies and if people see and wake up, we might have a competitive election. But I'm looking at how this has been a slow rollout, not just from 89 when the Marcoses came back, but from 2016. And when the Marcoses rallied or lobbied for Duterte to get Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator, buried in the Hero Cemetery of the Philippines. That was the beginning of the end. And now we're seeing it. And I just do not know what will happen if Bongbong Marcos is elected president. Can you imagine if any of the Trumps were elected? I mean, well, I don't know if the father would allow the sons or daughter to run in his stead. But that's what it would be. That's the horror that it would be like. And if it happens in the Philippines, you know, you can say, well, it happened there. Surely it can happen here. Oh no, it couldn't happen here because this is America. We're not like that. Well, I mean, like I said, the Philippines was made in the image of the United States. It can happen. So I want to switch gears and talk about Lowell High School because, like I said, I went to Lowell. My heart goes out to Lowell when I hear that their principal, Joe Ryan Dominguez, announced yesterday after school, put out a note saying he was resigning at the end of the school year. Here's what he said. I mean, he was just promoted in August from vice principal. He sent a letter to parents, an email. He said, while I deeply appreciate you all for the community and support I have received in the last 3 years, the decision to leave SFUSD is solely based on my desire to apply my passion for education in a district that values its students and staff through well-organized systems, fiscal responsibility, and sound instructional practices as a path towards equity. Well, I guess that means he doesn't get that. He desires, that's sort of a weirdly worded, he desires to apply his passion for all these great things that school systems can do. But it's not happening here in San Francisco, so he's leaving. Which makes sense. You know, here's the thing about Lowell. It's elite. It should be elite, but when they started messing around and began with the school board, you know, they got kicked out, trying to do all this shenanigans with, well, maybe all the schools should be, look, all the schools should be Lowell, but you don't tackle something like that. And I wrote an opinion piece for the San Francisco Chronicle. Look it up. I talk about Lowell being the crown jewel. I talk about the value to Lowell is for everyone, white, black, Filipino, Asian, everyone, people who are not rich. Lowell is a way to get a private school education and to get the best that public school can offer a poor kid from the Mission District. That was the value of Lowell. You want the best that public schools can offer? An academic high school like Lowell was it. But then you had some people in the school district that said, well, you know, it's not right. You know, there's not enough people of color there. I mean, 40% Asian. I mean, they saw a problem, but they applied a solution that doesn't solve the problem. It only exacerbates and shows how lousy the San Francisco public school system is. What they needed to do is to go back and look at K through 8 and see why kids aren't performing, why kids are losing step with other kids who continue on to score what they need to get into an all academic high school in grades 9 and 10. You know, you don't say, let's figure out a way to get those underprepared kids in grades 9 and 10 into Lowell. You say, all right, we can't deal with this now. This is going to be a long-term plan. We got to look at K through 8 and figure out how to get kids from the very beginning right up to speed. So that's why it didn't work, or their ideas didn't work, and that's why the school board was thrown out on its thrown out by the ear. And then there was a problem with the $125 million deficit, and you got teachers' unions, and it's bad. It's bad. Here's the thing. When I had the opportunity to come back to San Francisco, I had children. I could not, in good conscience, put my kids through the San Francisco public school, as good as Lowell was, or is, or really was. I didn't see that the San Francisco schools were an option for me. So I moved to another district in the East Bay, and my kids went to public schools, and they did all right. They all went to good colleges, but I sometimes wish I stuck it out, went back to San Francisco, and allowed my kids to experience Lowell, because they would have been city kids, which would have been different, than the suburban kids they turned out to be. But they're still good. It's just that the public schools in San Francisco were so bad. And I don't know what the answer is here now. The San Francisco Standard, which is an upstart paper, talked to some students. They quoted one student who said Cal Kinoshita, Asian American, said he didn't think Dominguez had done, quote, a sufficient job at addressing sexual violence or student advocacy. Because apparently, and now this is something you don't hear about much, students at Lowell and other high schools in the districts have been pushing the district to update the way it handles charges of sexual assault between students. That is something I hadn't heard of. However, this Kinoshita, the student, said that he felt Dominguez seriously addressed racism and actually handed out substantial punishments to repeat offenders of racism and homophobia, both of which are issues near and dear to Kinoshita and his circle of student organizers. So on the one hand, there were some good things that this guy Dominguez did, but apparently there were some parents who said, it was a board that gutted. If one of the problems is what made Lowell different is they had all these AP classes, and I know I took 4 or 5 of them, and each of them gives teachers extra money if they teach an AP class, and the schools get extra money in the budget. And certainly when you take an AP test, you're paying extra as a student. I happen to get, 4s and 5s, which are the 2 top scores in the different disciplines. There was English and history and US and European history. Didn't take any of the sciences. I mean, there are kids at Lowell taking AP physics, AP math, AP chemistry. They're taking all the APs. You could take care of maybe 1 to 2 years of college by taking APs. I took care of 1 year. But the teachers union were upset. They were upset about the monies and Lowell getting an unfair share. And that's really why there's this deficit. One of the reasons why there's this deficit in the San Francisco schools. The Standard goes to a tweet and says that when the district and others gutted AP and worked to destroy our school district, they say, look for more families to be forced into private school or to leave San Francisco. Way to go, destroying our public school system. And that's the truth. Like I said, when given a chance to come back to San Francisco after I'd sold my home, I could have come back, but the suburbs were more alluring, and not because the parking was better, but because the public schools were better. So, unclear what's going to happen at Lowell. It's just a mess there. in San Francisco. When your top school cannot get things together, it's I don't want to say it's hopeless, but they have gone to this way of admitting people that's not based on test scores. It's done by a lottery, which I said was a crock, because anytime you go to a lottery, what is a lottery? It's leaving things up to chance. It's just, flipping a coin. Maybe not even that, because a lottery, the odds aren't 50-50. The odds of a lottery are like 1,000,000 to 1 or more, leaving it to chance. And what are the chances of really applying some kind of answer to Lowell if it's all up to chance? I'm sad for my alma mater there, Lowell High. I don't understand how they're going to get out of this. But Lowell High School, with the principal leaving, when you got the chief bailing out, saying, I'm out of here, that is not a good look. So let us switch to Jackie Robinson, because Jackie Robinson Day is tomorrow, Good Friday, 415. It's also, I guess, 415 Day. It's a San Francisco day, as I'm told. But here's the thing about Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson is known as a Republican. And I mean, which is quite the opposite of what you would think, right? You think, oh, here's this firebrand. But no, Jackie Robinson was this gentleman militant. I mean, he really had to sit on his hands for a while and had to just hold it in. And he was Republican because he believed in free enterprise. He was Republican because he believed in capitalism. He believed in business. But in terms of society, don't mistake that as being a Clarence Thomas type. Because Jackie Robinson, from the readings I've done in African American publications and whatnot, he was as, I don't want to say as radical as they come. I mean, he wasn't militant to the point of, say, Black Panther militant. But he was within the system throwing some elbows. And he hated what he saw in society. There's a lot of people who try to pin him to liking Nixon, but he was not a big Nixon supporter when he saw that Nixon was a big Strom Thurmond supporter. And in fact, that whole Southern strategy thing kind of distanced Jackie Robinson, the Republican, from the other folks who were the mainstream Republicans of the day. Now, he was a fighter. He was the first. And he had to be on somewhat good behavior to be the first, to withstand can you imagine the epithets, the words hurled at Jackie Robinson from the stands? So I just remember when I first heard that he was Republican, I thought, how could that be? But it's complex. He was a traditionalist in the sense of economic opportunity, in the sense of business, free enterprise. But socially, he was for Black freedom. He was for Black equality. He was for the people. Don't make them. In fact, some people say that some of the latter part of the stories about his life kind of try to whitewash some ideas that, try to say, hey, Jackie Robinson, he was our guy. This is the kind of black guy that we like in America. No, Jackie Robinson was swinging some elbows, but he was conscious of what had to be done if you were going to be the first player to break that barrier. So it's complex. Don't make the assumption because you read, oh, Jackie Robinson was Republican, that he wasn't aware and that he was anything less than what he was, which is a civil rights pioneer. It just goes it goes to show what happens when you have a situation where, you get, oh, he's a Republican. Oh. No, we can find common ground on some things. And that's why we honor Jackie Robinson on April 15th every year. People put on number 42, they go to the ballpark. And I think it extends really beyond just Jackie Robinson Day in baseball. I think you can honor anyone who comes up to a situation and finds that they're dealing with an institution that is racist and sexist and all white, as are most institutions in America, from, well, I was going to say from the 60s on, because the civil rights era begins 65, 64, 65. But you go back to the Constitution, you go back to how institutions began in America, white supremacy was a driving force. Ask the Native Americans. Ask the indigenous Americans. Look at Ketanji Brown Jackson. In 232 years, not one African American woman until this year. So, lots of reasons to celebrate Jackie Robinson Day 2022 in a way that is just different, more historical. It's 75 years this year, but it's more historical because we still have barriers to bring down. And barriers that include not just black and white, but Latino, Asian American. I mean, I know from my dealings in the media, when I became the host of All Things Considered in 1989, no one thought it was a big deal, but I knew it. Was there ever a Filipino American before me in that role? No. Was there ever an Asian American before me in that role? No. Not in radio, not nationally, but Connie Chung, thank goodness. CBS Evening News. Connie Chung was there. The first Asian American, which I guess makes me the male Connie Chung. Breaking color barriers. It's important because you can't stop. Once you break the barrier, you got to make sure that people are coming in and following. You got to make sure that you bust the door down and everyone gets through. So that's our show for today. Today's Holy Thursday. Thank you for listening. If you happen to drop by to the Micro Talk Show of the AAPI and the AAXs, this is episode 287. And don't forget that you can always catch what I write on the ALDEF blog, ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. You can email me at emil@amok.com. We just asked the question, what does an Asian American think? Well, what does an Asian American? Well, I'll let you know in less than an hour. Hey, don't forget my show coming up. I do this show April 16th, 5 p.m. Central. Amok. That's what it's called. AMOK. How a poor kid from California finds his way home from NPR and Harvard. National Storytelling Network presents me. Hey, look, there's Amok. AMOK. There's me. Yeah, I mean, that was taken like 3 years ago. But go to storynet.org/events for details. Not much. I think it's $10. It's ticketed. I think you should go there because who knows? I think it could be a train wreck. It could be a train wreck, which you'd want to see just so you can laugh and say, "Ha, ha, Emil." No. I think it should be interesting. It should be interesting. So at this point, regular listeners of the show know we like to offer up our loving kindness meditation because that's what it is. You feel a little shame, feel a little unworthy. You feel like I'm not really quite. Take this hand here, put it here. Take this hand, put it here. Give yourself a squeeze. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. Really, you're okay. Honest. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till tomorrow. Possibly. It's Good Friday. We might come up at 3 o'clock. Till then.